A warm welcome to today's online Llafur event. I'm Ian Rees, Chair of Llafur, the Welsh People's History Society. Thank you for joining us. Before we get underway, just one small housekeeping issue. Please can I ask you all to mute your microphones to avoid background noise. Thank you. Just a quick couple of important announcements before we start. Firstly, following on from its successful launch last year, the Ieuan Gwynedd Jones Essay Prize for 2022 is now open. Entries in English or Welsh are invited from previously unpublished authors on any aspect of Welsh social or cultural history. Essays should be between 6,000 and 8,000 words, and the deadline for entries is the end of July 2022. For full details of the prize, please see the Llafur website and our Twitter account. I believe James is going to post a link to these in the chat. Thanks, James. And secondly, Llafur is pleased to announce an up-and-coming collaboration event focusing on Welsh Black history between the What's Happening in Black British group, Llafur and Bangor University. This will be taking place on Saturday, the 14th of May at Bangor University, and the keynote address will be given by Professor Charlotte Williams. The full programme and agenda is now live on the Llafur Twitter feed. I believe James is going to put the link in the chat now for those who are interested. Thank you. Okay, so on now to this morning's session, which is the third and final event in Llafur's Spring 2022 series on heritage, landscape and tourism. The title for today's event is Reinventing Ourselves, a Conversation on Heritage. Now, museums, archives, libraries and other heritage sites in Wales are places of historical discovery. They also face increasing challenges to negotiate a national landscape marked by long-term socioeconomic, cultural and educational transformation. And of course, the immediate context of COVID-19 and climate change. To explore some of these issues, I'm delighted to welcome our guest panelists, Sean Williams, Darren Macy, and Marion Gwynn for a discussion on the heritage landscape in Wales. And to chair this morning's event, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ben Curtis. Ben is a historian of modern South Wales, the coal industry, industrial disability and deindustrialization. He is currently an honorary research fellow at the University of Wolverhampton. He is the author of the book, The South Wales Miners, 1964 to 1985, as well as other numerous articles and chapters. He is a long-standing member of the Llafur Executive Committee, and he is also the Society's Treasurer. Ben, good to see you. Many thanks for joining us this morning, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. I'm yes, I'd just like to say I'm very, very pleased to be here chairing this panel this morning. So it's a fascinating sort of area, very timely in a number of respects, and I'm sure we'll have a very stimulating discussion. How this is going to work is essentially I'm going to introduce the panelists, who will then sort of talk very briefly about kind of their current work with relation to these questions. What's then going to ensue is essentially like a round table discussion, which I will kind of play a sort of discussant role as well as chair, kind of to help sort of steer and structure the discussion. Within that as well, there will also be, you're encouraged to, if you'd like to do so, to kind of ask questions via the group chat for this meeting. So please do that. And how I propose to make use of those is, well, they'll have a session. There'll be time at the end for dedicated kind of answering of questions, but also kind of in my sort of discussant sort of chair role, I'll perhaps look to feed some of the questions in to help as part of the discussion as and where appropriate, as well. So that being so, without any further ado, then I'm going to introduce our various members of the panel. So first, in no particular order, well, first of all, we have Marion Gwynn, and Marion has worked in the heritage sector for most of her adult life, initially working for the National Trust and then for the past 12 years as an independent consultant. She specialises in the contested past and set up the first exhibition to Atlantic slavery at any National Trust site. She's recently led an innovative programme for the Welsh Government for 100 museums in Wales on diversifying their working practices and collections. Our second speaker this morning is, a second panellist, is Darren Macy. And Darren is a member of Llafur's executive committee. Darren is the operational manager of the Heritage and Outreach Services at Wales's third largest local authority, which is of course Rhondda Cynon Taf. He combines this role with a teaching portfolio at the University of South Wales, where his areas of research include heritage, collective memory and cultural understanding, Wales and Atlantic activism, and the power and the glory, revolution and evolution of energy policies in Wales. And of course, last but by no means least is Sian Williams. And Sian is the head of special collections at Swansea University, managing the South Wales Miners Library, the Richard Burton Archives, as well as the University Library's rare book and other special collections, art collection and history of computing collection. She's of course been the historian of, been the librarian of the South Wales Miners Library since 1995. In 2013, she co-authored with Howell Francis the book Do Miners Read Dickens? The Origins and Progress of the South Wales Miners Library 1973 to 2013, which was published by Parthian. Sian is also the secretary and the vice president of Llafur, the Welsh People's History Society, a trustee of the Paul Robeson Wales Trust, sits on the board of the Dove Workshop, and is a recreational game director of Cricket Wales, a very busy person indeed. So those are your panelists here this morning. I'm very pleased to have them all speaking. So how I'm going to proceed from here is ask the panelists to initially explain their kind of current current position and their current active projects with regards to this topic. So we'll proceed in alphabetical order. So perhaps if Marion could go first, and then we'll go, and then Darren, then Sian.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben, for that lovely introduction. Yeah, just to, I think, provide a little bit of information about what I've been doing recently. Much of what I've been doing is based on the support that the Welsh Government has shown towards recognising diversity in Wales. This builds on a number of projects that have led to reports published by the Welsh Government. This includes, for example, the audit of statues and memorials to people connected to slavery and empire, and also the work that it has done, chaired again by Professor Charlotte Williams, on embedding the themes and experiences of minority ethnic people into the national curriculum of Wales, and also its set in stone report. And more than anything, this is all summed up in the work that I've been doing with museums, is based on its Race Equality Action Plan, which is a very active document. It's not something that's supposed to sit on a shelf, and it has, I think, last month just been renamed the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. And the work I've been doing recently has been with just under 100 local museums in Wales. These are ones that have already had accreditation, or those that are seeking accreditation, in helping them understand the context of diversity, understand the origins of racism, and understanding the context of their collections, how their collections, their buildings, their donors may be connected, and why we need to know those histories, how they engage with diverse communities, and how they can build on collections that actually represent the communities of Wales as they develop into the future.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Marion. Okay, Darren.
Thanks. I've actually been doing lots of stuff in collaboration with Marion and working on that, which I know I'll get to when we get that question. And myself and Sian are working on a project which involves partly Paul Robeson, and it'd be quite remiss of me not to mention it's Paul Robeson's birthday today. So gone but never forgotten. Solidarity with Paul Robeson. As a local authority, we face a number of challenges, but certainly in Rhondda Cynon Taf, while we've got a really diverse history and heritage, including Llantriston Castle and Castle North, and very layered understanding heritage. When you think of Rhondda Cynon Taf, I suppose coal is the first thing that pops into your mind. And our jewel outcome would be the Rhondda Heritage Park Museum. So we face a number of significant challenges in this area. The toxicity in coal in terms of global warming has been transformed in public's imagination as well into a toxic idea of visiting heritage sites which are engaged with coal. So that's something that we've really had to deal with. And with the support of the National Lottery, we're working on now. We've got a number of projects which we can discuss in a little bit more depth when we get to the first question. But I suppose the main focus of my research over that and my work with RCT over the last sort of 12 to 18 months would be, work alongside Marion on ethnicity and BAME history in this locality and the challenges we face with climate change, really. So I'm looking forward to discussing those this morning. Get lots of ideas off people as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Darren. Yes, as Darren's alluded to, there's a lot of topics to discuss, and we'll pick up on these as part of the discussion. Okay. Last but no means least, Sian, if you would, please.
Oh, thank you, Ben, and thank you for the introduction. And it's lovely to see so many people joining us this morning for what we hope will be a really interesting and lively discussion. And as Darren said, perhaps you will help us answer some of the questions that we're currently grappling with. So as Ben said, I'm head of special collections at Swansea University, and it's been, an interesting 2 years. For a large part of the last 2 years, particularly our Richard Burton archives has been closed to readers. The South Wales Miners Library was able to open a little bit earlier than the archives was. And so we have had this period where we have been working in an environment where we've had no access to our collections. And so how we, as we come out of COVID and we reopen, one of the things that we're thinking about is, do we actually want to go back to operating as we did before? And that's something that perhaps we can pick up on and talk about a little later on.
Brilliant.
Obviously,
thank you.
The collections at Swansea University, particularly the South Wales Miners Library, look at the educational, political, and cultural aspects of industrial South Wales. And I think in terms of projects that we're working on at the moment, one of them one of the big ones is really looking at the South Wales Miners Library and our relocation. We have to move, and it's looking at our short-term, considering our short-term, our long-term options, and what should be the South Wales Miners Library of the 21st century. So that's quite a big question for us. And other things that we've been working on, we've been working with local communities, helping them to interpret their histories, using our collections. And also we've got a very interesting collection of photographs, the Raisa Page collection of photographs, which Raisa Page was a documentary photographer who took photographs at Greenham during the miners' strike, went over to the US, took photos of women miners, and we have catalogued her collection and are currently digitizing it and looking at how we open that up to a wider public.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Sian. So as the panelists have alluded to, there's kind of three sort of basic sort of points or structure points for the discussion today, which we're going to pick up on really. So questions of kind of heritage, coal and climate, questions of diversity and heritage, and questions of the pandemic and recovery in response to that really. So those are going to be the focal points for the discussion. So I'll steer the discussion along those lines. So to take the first point of these really, just to mention that we're talking, when we think about heritage and certainly industrial South Wales, coal, as Sian has alluded to, and Darren, coal plays an important part in the history of the region and also its heritage. And yet, of course, increasingly, in the 21st century, people are aware of the very important role of climate change and the role of coal within that. And so the question really comes is, how do we when we think about the heritage of somewhere like industrial South Wales or other places where coal is featured so prominent, how do we square the heritage of the region with what's increasingly sort of viewed as a kind of toxic subject, really? So that's our first point. I think I'd like to ask Darren to lead the discussion, to open on that, and then we'll all kind of, the panelists will all kind of feed in their thoughts in turn.
Yeah, I think you've brilliantly led into that, Ben, and it's something we've wrestled with for a number of years, and it's increasingly come to the fore, and we've seen it not so much in visitor numbers, because pre-pandemic visitor numbers were really good, and we've tried to I'm talking specifically about the Rhondda Heritage Park Museum in this context, because I suppose there's lots of other, as I mentioned, diverse areas of history. But in terms of Rhondda Heritage Park Museum and as a working coal mine, it is a difficult sell. Is it difficult not so much to the older generations, but to the younger generations coming through, and as you mentioned, the toxicity of the ideas of coal. So what we are trying to do is to describe the process of making coal, and we mentioned Charlotte's work on the 2022 curriculum. So what we're trying to do is to tie into the 2022 curriculum, support the rollout of the understanding of education. So see a coal mine as a complete learning experience, develop that. So in terms of physics, mathematics, geography, pressures. So we're working alongside experts in climate change. I'm very fortunate to work at the University of South Wales, so we've got experts in climate change, geology, physics. We've engaged with all of those, also new technologies, which we'll deal with a little bit later on. In terms of, and the National Lottery, we're just in the process of constructing a bid for the redevelopment of the Rhondda Heritage Park Museum, and we're in phase one of that development at the moment. But we're looking at new technologies in terms of tapping into the water running through the mine workings, and heat exchange from that, powering the entire site from that, creating something which kind of mirrors TechniQuest in a way. That looks at new technologies, VR, engaging with younger people in lots of different ways. So that'd be one, really, is explaining climate change through the medium of carbon and how we come out of that. And also the new greener powers that's in Wales. This area is surrounded in tidal power, lots of wind farms in this area as well. Indeed, wind farms have been a significant funder of heritage in this area. So I think that's important to recognise that. So that's where we go. It's two-phase. It's recognising the evolution of power. There is a new revolution in power available to us in Wales. Let's discuss that. Let's discuss, that moment in 1851 where steam, with the advent, we decide steam coal, Welsh steam coal is the way to go to power the British Empire, and there's issues of diversity from that point as well. So that raises some interesting discussions there. So it's using carbon and coal as a starting point for discussion, and understanding that this is it's not toxic in terms of creating tremendous community spirit. Understanding that we are not defined by that substance. We are in some ways forged by that substance, but we've moved past that. So we can't be defined just by a chemical element there. So that's what we're looking at. And we're looking at the National Lottery, again, have been fantastic support in this, and hopefully they'll be working with us significantly moving forward. But I think we've got the opportunity as the centre of a fossil fuel area to describe, if we can change, if we can evolve in our ideas and our attitudes and use our experience as a learning tool, I think that's a fantastic opportunity. If we can do that, I think it's a brilliant opportunity for lots of communities right throughout the world. So I realise I went off on a little bit of a rant there, but I'm really super passionate about this. These communities are not defined by a chemical element. They are perhaps the reason these communities are here because of that chemical element, but that chemical element does not define us then. So that's my first rant of the way. Sorry.
Absolutely, no, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Darren. Either Sean or Marion like to kind of offer their thoughts.
Sorry, Shan, do you want to go first?
You
Shan?
go first.
No, I was just wondering whether Darren has actually been, have you had a chance to look at what other sites elsewhere are doing? I've been looking recently at some of the work that some of the museums in America have been looking at this. I'm thinking particularly, I think, is it the Edwin Carter Museum, Breckenridge? They've been, they were part of a pioneer settlement establishment. The museum grew up, and they were looking, for example, at how when they first started extraction there, it basically destroyed the ecology. And so what they are trying to do is working on how they can not only explain that, because the person who set up the museum, he was actually instrumental in getting rid of the wildlife, because he was killing them, recording them and stuffing them. Of course, they didn't have the rules and regulations that we have now. And so they're using that to explore not only how attitudes towards ecology has changed, especially regarding extraction and the damage on the landscape, but they're actually working outside of the museum walls with, for example, extraction companies throughout the state. And so they are trying to make sure that it's, and whatever they do in a lot of these museums in America, it's to make sure that it has relevance and impact to present day and the future.
Short answer is yes. So I've got significant connections, particularly with the Pennsylvania and the Appalachian coalfield. Matter of fact, there's a student who's kind of connected to your topic. So she did an undergrad on the Black experience in the Appalachian coal mines, and she's coming and doing a postgrad with Stephanie Ward's team in Cardiff. So I've been speaking to her quite significantly, and she's looking at Black experience in the Southfield coalfield. So the straight answer is yes. That's my first thought is always local, global. And I kind of, it's engaging with these are problems faced right throughout the world. So I've spoken to a number of colleagues in Australia, in America, particularly as I said, in Pennsylvania and Appalachian coalfields. So yes, there's some brilliant work going on in Durham as well in terms of heat exchange. So that's a great point, Marion. And we've spread our net quite far on that. But no, thanks for that. And again, as Sean mentioned, the more comments we can get in, I'm looking to pick everybody's brains. I don't pretend to have the answers to these questions. I'm looking for you to provide some of them for me, if you can, everybody out there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darren. Sean, do you want to comment?
No, I was actually kind of bring in the point, because of course within the at Swansea, at South Wales Miners Library in particular, we've had long-standing relationship with colleagues in Appalachia, and there's been the exchange has gone over well over 40, almost 50 years now. And there was the project, the After Coal project, which was undertaken by Tom Hansel, which Howell and Maya Francis contributed to, and which is looking at life in communities after coal. One of the projects that we have recently done at the South Wales Miners Library is actually uncover a video that Howell Francis actually recorded with a group of his adult education students in the 1980s, which was looking at how the environment had changed in the Upper Delice Valley in the early 1980s, and since the pits are closed in the 1960s. And so what we did at the end of last year was show clips of the video, it's called A Waste of Our Time, in communities in the Upper Delice Valley, and then created a new video picking up on the themes of environmental change as well as social change, and and we were able to look at how the impact and how the landscape looks so different from the 1960s, then comparing it with the 1980s and now, and and what are the hopes and for the future. And that was a really interesting project, and the opportunity of working with the local people as well. It's something which I really hope that we can can do some more on it, and because I think those discussions are so important to have, but have them with the local communities, and have them using the resources that we've got in libraries, museums, archives. What we're finding, and Darren, you're probably finding the same, we have people coming in who don't know what coal looks like, so the way in which we interpret our collections, we're having to change that, because people don't actually recognize what coal looks like. They can't understand, driving through through the valleys, what it could have looked like when all the coal mines were there. And I think that's why our collections and how we interpret them and reinterpret them are so important.
Can I be really cheeky? Sorry, Ben, can I be really cheeky, Sean? Can I have access to some of that footage?
You can. It's on our website. I'll find it, I'll put the link on in the chat now.
The reason I'd be really super keen to get that, we just created a VR mining experience. So thanks to the West Cumberland's Winter Wellbeing, we've bought 30 VR headsets, which are completely standalone. We've mapped the inside of part of our mine, and we've got footage in there, so it's a completely immersive experience. So that'd be fantastic to insert some of that. So, and we got pathway footage and lots of different films which we've had the purchase copyright for. But anything we can get for free, as you know, in our sector, Sean, we could do with all the support we can. So no, that's great, and there we go. It's worth coming this morning just for that. Thank you very much, Sean.
That's okay.
Brilliant. That's excellent. And I think, as a panelist has said, I think there's a number of things that can be said about this as a topic, really. I mean, how we approach these things from a heritage point of view, I mean, we're not really, what we're trying to do, I suppose, is not in any kind of sort of a Trumpian sense, sort of champion kind of sort of fossil fuel sort of burning in the 21st century, but really what this is about, I suppose, as has been alluded to by the various panelists, really, is thinking about some of the ways in which, in places like industrial South Wales, in places like Appalachia and so on, these communities were created and shaped by the impact of the industry on them in a transformative environmental and social sense. And it's sort of showing, I suppose, why this mattered, the effect this had on the communities, and how things have changed over time, really. And we can sort of show the significance of the industry in that sense without in a way sort of championing in kind of sort of burning of fossil fuels in the 21st century. And I wonder whether something like that is the way to kind of proceed from a heritage point of view with this topic. I'm mindful of the fact that we need to move on to discuss our various other points and keep to time, because we could have a discussion on any one of these topics for the whole session, and I'm mindful that we need to kind of spend adequate time for each one. So for our second point, which we're going to be talking about today, is this question of heritage and diversity. And I suppose the main sort of starting point for this is thinking about or discussing the various ways in which how are heritage organizations responding to the growing awareness of the need for decolonization of their collections and the interpretation of their collections. And I wonder if Marion could open our discussion on this point, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and that is such a good opening question. I would say that it has been through, the heritage industry as a whole in Britain has been through a massive journey. It was initially, I'm sure many here will remember 2007. 2007 was the bicentenary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, but there were hundreds, and again, it was thanks to the National Lottery that put something like £16 million towards those, and museums took that very, very seriously. It didn't become a Wilberfest or a Wilberfarce, as many people thought it was going to be after Wilberforce. But what many museums did, they took it as very seriously. They looked at how their areas were connected to slavery and the broader empire. But after that, of course, we were hit by austerity. The museum sector was hit extremely hard. Many staff were lost. That knowledge that was gained during that time was basically lost. And so it's been a period of catch up. But I think now we're in a different position, and museum staff are taking it very seriously indeed. And in many instances, they're very enthusiastic and keen to diversify the way that they work. They have an inherited problem, though. I was talking many years ago to Sir Neil Cossins, who used to be head of the Science Museum and former head of English Heritage. And he said that the museum sector has basically inherited a collections and a collection policy that is centuries too old for what it actually needs to be in the 21st century. And so a lot of the things that staff are looking at now, a lot of it, of course, if you have a look at the staff itself, no individual problem at all, but it is inherently white. And if you have, I think the heritage sector, 5% diversity within the workforce, within an average of 16% within the population itself. So there's an inherent imbalance there. Some museums still have a collections policy that, especially local museums, which are of course supposed to mirror their local communities in many ways, their collection policy now needs to be readdressed so they can reach out to the increasingly diverse populations. Certainly what I've been doing over the last few months now, working with, as I say, many local museums across Wales. It's been wonderful. Their enthusiasm, their passion for wanting to do this, and they really want the tools to do this. There are problems. There seems to be a disconnect between front of house staff and senior managers in many instances. It seems to be the responsibility of one, maybe two members of staff, instead of it being a whole site approach. And that's certainly something that needs to be looked at. And when people are doing exhibitions, it needs to be the reworking of language needs to extend way beyond what's front of house, to the cataloguing, to the boxes, to every single part of it. Training will help. Training is going to be massively important, of course, and reaching out to the different communities. I've done engagement exercises between museums and local communities. They've been so fruitful. And I think the more that we can get museums actually speaking to communities, getting them involved and getting them employed in the heritage sector so they can think of it realistically as a career, then yeah, Wales has a very positive future.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Marianne. And Sean, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think, picking up on some of what Marianne has said, I think across the sector, we're looking at our catalogues. I think about our collection, Raisa Page collection that we've got of photographs, and Raisa was she was taking photographs in the 1970s and the 1980s. She was going into institutions and taking photographs in care settings, and of course some of the terminology that is written on the back of some of the photographs, perhaps not terminology that we would necessarily use now. And so as a profession, we are thinking, okay, well, how should we be managing all of this to and to make sure that we are opening up our collections to the widest possible audience as well, not limiting our collections through our catalogues by the subject headings that traditionally have been used. And I think the other area as well that I think as libraries, museums, archives across the world, I think, are thinking about is how we make sure that we are more inclusive in our collecting, in terms of making sure that those marginalized, those hidden voices are captured and feel included, and breaking down some of those barriers of of people wanting to work with us, or to entrust their precious memories and collections into our care as well, and know that, you know, that they can trust us to look after them and make them available as they would wish.
Absolutely. Darren, do you want to?
Yeah, you know, picking up on something Sean and Mary said about engagement. So I conducted, or my team conducted, the audit of memorialisation, which fed into Gain and Legals, or built upon perhaps Gain and Legals audit. And what we found I'm talking specifically about on the kind of task, what we found was perhaps a couple of problematic areas that, I suppose, the central one for me. There's a blue plaque to Lord Aberdare in Mountain Ash Comprehensive, and obviously Lord Aberdare chair of the Niger Corporation. But my suggestion was that stays in situ, because that's an ideal opportunity to have a discussion with students around, you know, what was Lord Aberdare's involvement in the Niger Corporation and Niger Company, sorry, and so on and so forth. What I found was a lack of or maybe a cultural amnesia in terms of the links of this area with the Atlantic slave trade and slavery and the civil rights movement, but from a slightly different perspective. I looked at this, there's two angles for me. There's the Chris Evans angle, which is slave Wales, talking about Wales's involvement in the slave trade. And I suppose there's the Daniel Williams example. And if you've not read Slave Wales or Blackskins Blue Books, I'd suggest go out and read both books. They're both fantastic. So Daniel looks at the engagement of Wales with abolitionism, anti-slavery movement, the civil rights movement. You know, today Paul Robeson's birthday, so it's just an ideal example of that. So what I'm trying to do in this area is to promote and understanding that we have cultural links. You know, this area has cultural links with these movements, and I'm working on a project which is funded by the Welsh Museum Federation with Sean, actually, called Proud Valley. So we're looking at Moses Roper and slave narratives, and understand, you know, Moses Roper spoke in numerous places in across South Wales, publishes his slave narrative in Wales, sells 7,000 copies in the 1840s, which is absolutely phenomenal. So for me, it's trying to engage the public in this area. And Maria mentioned, you know, as local historians should try to mirror perhaps their public, is to engage this public. I speaking really frankly, I witnessed the pushback from the Black Lives Matter movement. I witnessed the All Lives Matter nonsense, and I think you've got to tackle this head on. You can either ignore it or decide these people are you know, complete racist and I don't want to get, or you can tackle the ideas. You can say, well, no, this is important. You know, we need to understand, you know, that we have significant engagement and significant histories of supporting other people who are disadvantaged, of supporting other groups, of reaching out. So that's kind of where we are. In terms of decolonization of our collections, Marian's worked with my team, and we do have some issues, and there are some things we need to address. But because of the chronology of the growth of this, and I'm sorry I'm speaking specifically about RCT, but because of the chronology of the growth of this area, there's not that much overlap with, you know, the end of slavery in 1887 and the end of slavery in the British Empire in the 1830s. I think we've got a different challenge in RCT. Our challenge is to engage this public and bring them to an understanding. This is not about BAME history. This is about Welsh history, and incorporating that into one Welsh history. So yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, but it's one we've really got to tackle. Otherwise, if we don't engage with these people and ignore them, you know, I'm saying these people, that sounds slightly derogatory, but if we don't engage with all the public, I think we're not going to change anything. There's no point singing to the choir.
Absolutely no. I think sorry, Mariam, but please.
I would like to come in. I think it's if you don't mind, the points that Sian was raising, and Darren, that actually it's about building this trust thing, and it's not about replacing one dominant narrative with another one, as Darren knows full well. It is about making sure that there is, you know, what I call polyphony, that there's multiple voices. I don't think really that we can have an object in our museum that's only touched one one type of person, one group of people. And if we can bring the multiple voices in, and this is where I think IT can be really important here, then we can tell those stories. No one's story can be left out. And it's about the way that we bring those people together so they can genuinely believe that we do value their opinion. For example, if you look at, say, a copper manila that was used as an exchange object for enslaved Africans, who tells that story? Is it somebody from the Caribbean whose ancestor was brought with it? Is it somebody from West Africa who's part of the trading family? Or is it the sailor? Is it descendant of one of the sailors? Or is it somebody from Paris Mountain whose ancestor had mined that? Or somebody who worked in the smelting factories of South Wales and Holywell? There's no single voice to these objects, and I think if we can bring these voices together, and this is where IT could be really helpful in this, then hopefully that we can address some of those issues that Darren and Shan brought up.
Absolutely. I'd just like to underline the various points made by the panelists here. I think, one of the challenges from a heritage point of view is to tell the story of, Welsh history, Welsh industrial history in this kind of globalized, contextualized manner. It'd be possible to do it in a rather enclosed manner, but I think that's missing the point really, because, as we say, the history of kind of Welsh copper, Welsh coal, these kind of things, they exist in a context of, the British Empire and slavery and everything that went with that, and kind of money from those going into finance, the growth of the iron industry and so on. So it belongs in this imperial context, which sometimes can be forgotten, I think, which needs to be borne in mind, but also that, this question of, people from sort of from the Caribbean and sort of other places like that coming to work, coming to live and work in Wales. I mean, it's a question which is actually, it'd be possible to just kind of sort of put it to one side, to kind of sort of put it in a, in this kind of category in the corner, but actually these kind of questions, I think, do relate to, Welsh history as a whole. There's evidence of, as the programme on TV last year based on Norma Gregory's work on Black Welsh miners, for example. I think this shows that this kind of this is an element. This is Welsh history. This isn't just kind of in a marginalised kind of sort of ethnic minority history. It's part of the story of Welsh history, and the story of Welsh history and the telling of it from a heritage point of view is enriched by the showing of these extra perspective and these extra so the diversity of the Welsh historical experience. So just like to underline the various points have been made by the panelists there on that score. As I say, all of these points, we could have a session on just any one of these, but I'm mindful of the need to kind of keep to the time and so on. So the third point, which I wanted us to talk to today, what we're talking today, is a question of the impact of the pandemic and so on, both its impact and what do we do from there. And I suppose the opening question, the question to lead off on for the panel really is, has there been a shift in focus as a result of the pandemic from a heritage point of view? And when we think about this in this context, how do we find a balance between the opportunities, the opportunities that are they created, opportunities or challenges created by the pandemic? And perhaps Sian could lead off on that.
Yeah, where do we start? I think, yes, most certainly. I think there's been a huge shift, and I think, picking up on one of the points is about making more of our collections, making more available, and doing more online, which is certainly what we and I know a lot of libraries, archives and museums have been doing. However, I am also mindful, having worked with adult learners and working in the areas in which we do in South Wales, that not everybody has easy access to broadband, not everybody has easy access to computers. And I'm always battling within my own institution. There is this expectation that everybody knows how to get onto Facebook and do all these things? And the answer is no, they don't. And so there is that challenge there, you know, because I certainly, for us, we had a difficulty in at the start of COVID, because, as I said, we could not physically go into the archive, go into the library to access our collections. And so we were trying to provide a service where we just didn't have access to our collections. We had very little of it digitized and available online. So that is certainly something that we are looking at. You know, there was a survey, a national survey that was done in archives looking at people who were using the archives via, it's called the Distance Inquiry Services Survey. And, you know, looking at that and looking at the numbers of people who wouldn't have gone into an archive ordinarily, but have come across them during COVID and have used their services. You know, in our own instances, it was probably about 35% of people who maybe or wouldn't have come in and used our collections physically, but would like, you know, now they have found us. Hopefully we want to retain them. So looking at how we offer our services and make our collections more available. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about is, do we go back to our old opening hours? Do we open 9 till 5 every day? Or do we think about how we use the staff resource and actually use staff time, maybe 1-2 days a week where we close to the public, and they are then creating and enabling more of our collections to be available online, you know, and deal with demand that way. I don't know.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of these questions whereby, when there's obviously very real challenges that have been posed by the pandemic, but is it, as Sean says, is it an opportunity to kind of rethink how some of these things are done? Darren, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think for us, the pandemic, everything Sean said, we really echo, but we were really fortunate. It also shone a light on something that where we were lacking in having one cohesive central heritage website or web presence. So, and again, thanks to the National Lottery, who've been wonderful through this. We secured a £250,000 grant for an altered images project, which includes a project officer to create this, and to ask the community, to engage with the community and ask them, you know, what's important to them, what heritage do they want to remember, how they can engage with it. I think that, but I really take on board Sean's point about not everybody's got access to the internet and access to broadband. So I think that's where the VR extension comes in. We hope to build on these 30 VR headsets where you can take them to care homes, you can take them out in the community. And I'm really keen. I spoke quite significantly about our jewel in our crown around the Heritage Park Museum, but you know, I also, you know, I run the Heritage Service. So for me, the Heritage Service is about taking these objects out into the community, taking heritage to small halls, to every nook and cranny that we can, of people who don't generally engage with them. So I see, in some ways, the pandemic has offered us some tremendous challenges, but also tremendous opportunities. You know, and an understanding. You know, let's be honest, would we be sitting here in front of our laptops on a Saturday morning, you know, 53 of us or 55 of us in a room together having this discussion without COVID? I'd suggest perhaps not. You know, I think it's engaged everybody and connected everybody in our sector, but much more. And you know, the cross-fertilization of ideas has been really, really useful. But I think you've got to grasp this as an opportunity as well. And luckily enough, with the extra funding we've had, I think it'll improve us as a service, improve us as a heritage offering within our area. And I'm ranting on again. I do apologise. I'll go on forever. Sorry, Ben.
No, that's fair enough. No, absolutely no. As you say, that, you know, there's these kind of things does open a possibility for for people for greater access beyond those who can sort of it's physically possible for them to travel to these kind of places, really, I suppose. Marion, would you like to?
Yeah, I cannot agree with Shannon and Darren enough. I think the way that it it has excited. Yeah, dreadful at first. People didn't really know what was happening, what they were doing. But then there was a realization that this was a time that they could actually start planning new ways of engaging, new ways of working, of using their staff, a point that Shan made very clearly there. And as Darren said, of reaching out into communities. Because for me, working in diversity there's sort of an expectation that you open your doors. Why aren't they coming? No, you have got to be the one who breaks those barriers down. You have got to be the one that goes out into those communities. And I've seen some amazing work being done by museums that are actually using their collections, using VR, and actually, because of COVID, going out and sort of projecting images of their objects onto walls in communities that they want to engage with, or yeah, if it can lead to new exciting ways of working, then we will have broken those barriers of this 18th, 19th century dogma that has sort of kept the museum sector back for such a long time. Certainly from what I've been seeing now is a very exciting time. And because of organizations like the National Lottery, that the museum sector is able to do some things that no other sector has been able to do. One thing regarding what the problem with some grant providers, though, is that they are demanding visitor figures from the year before. And of course, that's something that you cannot do when you've been in lockdown. And I know this has hindered a lot of organizations that they're applying for a variety of different grants as they move forward. So grant providers also perhaps need to think very flexibly in the way they work in museums now, and understanding that their standard funds won't work.
Yes, absolutely. It's there's kind of challenges and obviously in a number of respects very real challenges, but I think as the panelists have indicated in their contributions, I mean, there's a lot to be said for resources permitting, which is always the key question, of course, but I mean, opportunity to make these kind of this sort of heritage, these kind of collections, something which is kind of more accessible in that sense. And in so doing, it's perhaps possible in some of the ways Marion has suggested, to sort of show, to make it easier for the average person to kind of get a sense of why these historical collections, why this heritage work matters in terms of the sense of identity and sense of history of the sort of places that we're talking about, and sort of making that connection more apparent in a way. So I think there's yes, I mean, there are a number of challenges, of course, but it's an opportunity, as a panelist have said, it's an opportunity to rethink how, as a sector, the heritage sector engages with the public and makes its material, makes what it has available in that sense. Okay, the panelists want to contribute anything further on that topic? We're happy to go to a Q&A at this point. We've got a question come through now. Darren, do you want to?
No, I'm just going to say I think the other two contributions and yourself, Ben, was brilliant, and it's, we know everybody really well, but sometimes little kernels of ideas come out from these discussions, and I think if nobody else has taken anything from this morning, I picked loads of brains and I got loads of notes. So you'll see lots of these ideas appearing in other kind of stuff soon, I'm sure.
Excellent. And that's brilliant, Darren, because the point is with these sort of things, it's useful to have these ideas, but as a springboard to kind of sort of effecting the sort of change we want to see. As someone famously once said, philosophers have interpreted the world. The point is to change it, I suppose. And there's certainly something, if we can bring something from this discussion this morning, then so much the better.
As a way of saying goes, to be a leader, you've got to be a bridge, and I think that this is what these sessions are. They're a bridge. Yeah,
absolutely. I think perhaps this is a useful point, because we've got there's a couple of questions come in on the chat, so we'll perhaps use these to or kind of work through some of these now, and we'll have these as an opportunity for the panelists to kind of respond to them. Really, there's a couple of useful, very very good questions here already. So to take the first one from Kerry Black, was asked about the question of the issue of the cooperation agreement between Labour and Plaid includes the development of a new cultural strategy reflecting Wales's diversity, Welsh language, the arts, culture and heritage. What should be included and why? I mean, this is again a topic in its own right here. What are your thoughts, panelists, as to this topic?
Basically just list the things we've just been talking about. I really don't think there's enough time for us to begin to even address that, but certainly I think we've touched on some really, I think, critical features. The fact it's got to be relevant, the fact it's got to look at how our stories have been told, how they can be told, look at who our communities are, what they have, how they can contribute, how these reflect what to actually think what is a museum, what is the heritage sector in Wales, what should it be, and these are all conversations that this needs a feasibility plan all of its own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the nature of what we're talking about today, you know, as I've said a couple of times now, you know, all of these are all, and they're thematically connected, of course, but all of these are all massive, you know, areas in their own right, and we could have had a discussion on any one of these particular subtopics, and this question of kind of what to be included within the cooperation agreement, you know, is a whole different thing as well. But I think certainly, you know, with some of the areas we've signposted today are questions which need to be sort of borne in mind. Sorry, Darren.
Yeah, I just for me, it's building on the work that Charlotte did with schools and a new curriculum. I think that's the key to it, is to local, global, and to focus on those two things, and to find the local hook to engage with teachers, and you know, I think as a sector we should be far more engaged with the schools in our areas than we are, you know, and I'm constantly trying to strengthen the links in my area. I'm constantly trying to support teachers, because it's such a difficult areas for teachers to deal with. It's difficult for heritage and museums, but it's even, I suggest, it's an even more complex situation standing in front of a diverse group of, or even non-diverse group of children. And so we should be looking to produce resources both for students and also for teachers. You know, teachers should be coming to our organisations and say, well, you know, how do I approach this? You know, Maria mentioned Manilas. So if I was, you know, teaching in Swansea, I'd be, you know, go to the Waterford Museum and say, can I have a Manila? Can I take over the classroom? Can I show? Can I engage? Can I pick up all the strands that Maria mentioned and give students an idea that their area is still rooted in a global history and a global engagement. So that's the key for me, is rooting things, hooking things in the local and engaging with the bigger ideas.
And could I just come in to back everything that Darren has just said, but more than anything as well, there must be always support for staff. It is as if staff are supposed to know how to do this from the very beginning, or it's as if whatever's thrown at them, they are expected to know what to do with it. It is amazingly challenging. It is really challenging. And this is on top of a workload where there isn't a second to spare. You know, our heritage sector staff in Wales need support to be able to do these things, and that should be essential to any planning for the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yes. There's another question sort of related to this now in the chat, and as I say, we still do have time. So if anyone else wants to contribute a discussion point in here, or even ask a quick question, then please do feel free to do so. There's another point. Another points or question raised by Georgina Gittins in the chat now, who says, she says, there's something I'd like to see included in the cultural strategy, which is the difference Wales has made and is making to refugees who've settled here fleeing conflict. What were the panel's response to that?
Refugees is quite an emotive subject at the moment, and I think the idea of refugees over the last, if you take it over 5 years rather than the last 6 months, I think it's highlighted the problems in our society, lots of issues within our society around race, you know, and language, you know, refugees, migrants, and again, I'm being very careful in choosing my words here, but I think we have been really welcoming, and I think that engagement with some of the ideas that I mentioned about, you know, Welsh having or Wales having a collective understanding and a collective empathy with other areas which have suffered in different kinds of ways. So I think that's important to highlight that, but I think it's important to also highlight how the current refugee crisis has perhaps highlighted some of the fissures in our society as well. And I think that's an important discussion to have for me anyway.
I know that there are museums who are working directly with refugees. They're doing it in a variety of ways. They are taking refugees around museums so they can actually learn a little bit about the communities where they are based, but also so then that they can then share their stories about what's important to them. And this reminds me, this whole session has reminded me just how much fantastic work there is going on in Wales that we don't know about. And we are in many ways, we need to stop being so shy about the work that we're doing in Wales. It is a journey. There are many challenges, and we are in the early stages of what is a new, you know, way for the heritage sector in Wales. But I think if there was some way that we could actually know about what is happening across Wales, it would be such an encouragement for the rest of the sectors. Also, others can pick up on examples of good practice. But this just reminded me there's a lot of work going on within the museum sector in Wales regarding refugees. We just don't know about it. And how fabulous if we knew what other people were doing in their museums. How inspiring for others.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think just picking up on Marian's point and, you know, addressing some of the themes across the session, I think one of the things mentioning about sort of refugees and so on, it sort of goes to underline some of the broader points, I think, in terms of the heritage of Wales and the UK, I suppose, now, and the ways in which kind of the arrival of different groups of people at different points in time, you know, have played a role in the shaping of our our history in that sense, and sort of an awareness of that actually is not just kind of sort of, you know, tokenism, but actually it's one of the central strands of kind of our story, and an adequate reflecting of that it would, you know, sort of is necessary for an enriching of our understanding of our past. There's a couple of other very good questions here which I'll just kind of bring to the panel's attention. First one from Andrew Chandler. And this is possibly a whole topic in itself as well, so I'm mindful of the time, but anyway, so he says, since the early 80s, we seem to have used heritage as a synonym for history. What is the role of industrial archaeology and heritage education? Also, I was pleased with Llafur's recent emphasis on migration. As historians, do we need to move away from nostalgia and memory towards a more post-industrial, post-imperial approach? For example, the breakup of the coal complex from 1926, and its impact on migration. I say there's a lot to pick through there. What are your thoughts just off the cuff on that, panelists?
I'd be happy to jump in. I think that's a really good point, and something I'm really interested in is to change the playing field a little bit. I've looked at some of the work done on migration to the lighter industries, from the South Wales coalfields to car manufacture, Oxford, Cowley, and the ostracisation of Welsh people there, and you know, there's this brilliant oral histories on. So I think that's a really good point, and I think that's something we should investigate. And I don't think anybody's done a really exhaustive study. So perhaps Brindley Thomas would be the word called in a rebirth pops out into my mind. But no, I think that's a topic that definitely deserves a lot more emphasis. No, I think that's really good. And I think if we engage with that topic, perhaps it becomes easier to engage with the previous question. You know, if we can understand ourselves as migrants or refugees, or whatever you want to term it, as it becomes then easier to understand other people's experience.
Absolutely. Sian, do you want
to? Yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, there's a lot of work to be done on this. This is a whole research topic on its own, and I guess it's something that, in a sense, you know, just talking about my own experience with the South Wales Miners Library, it's something that, you know, I've been thinking about with our, as we have to move locations, and thinking about how we reinvent ourselves, you know, how we present ourselves. Do we look at our industrial history through through nostalgia, through these rose-tinted spectacles? I don't know. I think, you know, it's something that I have been looking at, thinking about. I don't quite know where we're going and what we're doing with it, but I think it is something that we do need to be doing and analysing and discussing more.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's as you say, Marianne, do you want to?
Yes, really just building on what the others have said. It's so complex. You've got the nuances of community bonding, the folk memory, but as Shanna just said, that's frequently unrealistic. You know, the society we dreamt we once had, we perhaps didn't have, and using those stories of migration to understand immigration. Now, certainly the story that Darren said about attitudes towards Welsh people as they went to factories elsewhere, but also, for example, looking at Welsh people going to work in some of the industrial sites in North America, and their attitude towards enslaved Black people. There was no camaraderie there because they saw them as people who were taking away paid work from them. And so there's massive, there's so many stories here that we could actually use to explore. But I think industrialization, post-industrialization, technology transfer, and some of those amazing stories that Darren was talking about at the moment, I think industrial archaeology and how that fits within the heritage sector. Now, to me, it is a great way of understanding the world, not only in the past, but in the present and future as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, all of you. This is a great sort of session in this sense for sort of addressing some of these big questions. I mean, all of them are very sort of, you know, expansive, open-ended topics. But I think it's useful to think about kind of ways forward, imagining, you know, how we kind of adapt our thinking and those lines. There's another question here now. It's a short question, but potentially a very open-ended one in the chat from Jane Wademan. She says, to each of the panel members, I suppose, think from a heritage point of view, we think about how we address the heritage of Wales and how we reflect that. She says, what would success look like in, say, 5, 10, 20 years time, please? Here we are. Who wants to address that first?
Everybody's looking the other way at that point, Ben. Everybody's, yeah. Again, brilliant question. Which of those? So are we 5? Looking in the short term, more diverse in terms of our understanding, and, you know, building on what Marion said and what Bushan said. Yeah, a more rounded understanding that you know, heritage is a complex issue which has got lots of different levels. And I think Marion's point that an object means lots of things to lots of different people, I think that's brilliant. I think that's where we should be aiming for, is these objects, these understandings are so complex and come from so many different perspectives, but we need to understand, or try to understand, as many of these perspectives as possible to understand that object, and not to take these preconceived, you know, we've mentioned, you know, going back with rose-tinted glasses in the past. Everybody's guilty of that to some extent, and not being objective. Perhaps to be more objective, more understanding, and have a more rounded, more complex understanding of different stories, of different individuals and different societal groups. That'd be my wish list, really. For and let's go for 5 years, not 20 years.
I think, you know, because I'm thinking about this in terms of our status as a profession, and I guess I would like to see the work that we do more valued. I feel like we're often kind of forgotten about or undervalued. We're expected to do so much with a lot less. You look at all the cuts that, you know, libraries have had, museums have had, and I think the heritage, the library, museum, archive professional has such an important role to play within our communities, within our societies, at a time where, again, post-COVID or coming out of COVID, or perhaps not, who knows, people feel quite down, quite flat, and yet we're just expected to do more with less. It's like, it's frustrating, very, very, very frustrating. So yeah, I would like to see our voices heard a little bit more, being able to be part of the discussions, part of the decision making, and having a bit more funding, please, as well.
I suppose I would, summing up and building on what Darren and Sian have said, like to see a museum sector that is active in all parts of society, to see museums that are actually multi-site, working with different communities, and also museums that are flexible. So many times now museums, and again it's maybe working with museum designers, you see these displays, very expensive, beautifully lit, but they are static, and they're static for about 10-15 years, and there's nothing you can do about that. So working with museum designers to make sure that they are flexible, that museums can respond to changing societies. How has society changed in the last couple of years? Dramatically, way beyond anything that and the heritage sector can respond to that. So I would like to see the heritage sector that is a museum possibly, but also with satellites that work throughout a community, and to make sure that it is far more of a symbiotic relationship with those who actually live within the community and about the stories that it tells.
Can I just jump in on one point there? So part of our redevelopment of big reconstructing, we're looking at interpretation panels, but on screens, so you'll be able to choose whether that would be age appropriate in terms of under 16, over 16, over 50. So we can term things in different manners, because interpretation panels are so open, and you've got to be, in some senses you write them and think I'm being patronizing, or you're being, it's too complex. You can have them in. The other thing with interpretation panels is, because it's bilingual, brilliant, it's bilingual, but you could have a Welsh version, English version, which cuts down all the text, it's more images. So that's something we're actively engaged in, is making these experiences far more interactive, and that comes back to what we was talking earlier. But yeah, we're super passionate about it. I think you're spot on, Mario.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot, all of these topics, there's a lot more that could be said about them. And I think that whilst we've had a very useful, fruitful discussion in a number of respects, this could carry on kind of ad infinitum, really. I'm mindful of the time and so on. I think we've pretty much reached the end for the session. So before we conclude, before I hand back to Ian, Llafur's chair, to just wrap things up, I'd just like to thank our panelists, Sian Williams, Darren Macy and Marion Gwynn, for their illuminating contributions this morning. I think it's been a very useful discussion, and I hope everyone, you found it as interesting and useful as I have done. So thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions. I'm very, 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 very glad for that. So I hope you've all enjoyed the session. I'll now pass back to Ian to wrap up for the afternoon now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Ben. That was great. On behalf of everyone, I think I'd like to extend our thanks again to you for chairing this morning's event. Very skillfully, I may add. There were quite a few topics there, ranging from climate change, diversity, and throw in the pandemic as well. Many thanks also to Marion, Sian and Darren for offering us such a range of fascinating insights into the challenges and controversies around the role of heritage in contemporary Wales. And many thanks also to you, the audience, for your comments and questions via chat. Grateful thanks, as always, to the hardworking members of the Llafur Events Subcommittee for helping organising and publicising this, and indeed all of Llafur's online events. As I said at the start, today's session was the third and final event in Llafur's spring series on heritage, landscape and tourism. If you've enjoyed it, you may be interested in visiting our online recordings section of the website, where you will find the recordings and all of our online events over the past 2 years. They really are worth a listen. If I can also just be permitted a quick membership plug, our website includes a membership sign-up facility. A mere £15 to join, £10 for unwaged. So if you're not a member yet, please do consider joining. It only remains for me to say thank you once again for your support, and we look forward to welcoming you back to more Llafur online events in the near future. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much.